How's everybody doing? Well, I'm glad to see all your faces here. As we know, this is the last session of Unreal Fest 2024 Seattle. Very happy that everyone is here. My name is David Lee. I'm the Game Developer Product Manager at Microsoft Visual Studio. And welcome to Modernizing Game Development with Visual Studio and AI. So I'm very excited to share all the great improvements that the team has been working on in the past year. I've got a very action-packed agenda for you all today. So we'll briefly talk about what we think here at Visual Studio, what developer productivity is. Then I'll get into some of the performance updates that we have been making the last year. And we'll take a look into Build Insights and how you can leverage the tool to really get a deep understanding of the way that your builds work and can optimize your build and shave off some seconds. Of course, this is a UE Fest. I'm not going to have a talk without covering the latest UE integrations. And lastly, I'll be using the Lyra sample project to showcase both the UE integration and how you can use GitHub Copilot as your personal AI programmer. So when we think about developer productivity, there isn't really a single definition or metric that we measure this by. When we talk about developer productivity, we think about how you, the game creator and developers, can create a high-quality game given time and resources. And at Visual Studio, our team is focused on building tools that will help minimize friction in your workflow, as well as reduce context switching. Because we know that when you're in the zone, you're way more productive. In essence, this really just means we want to amplify your creative efficiency so you can focus on what matters the most: solving hard problems and coming up with innovative solutions. We build our tools to be a natural extension of your developer workflow, so that by improving your creative efficiency, we can improve the cost of building the game, we can increase the quality that you can put into the game, and of course, for game developers, increase your satisfaction while coding. And we do that by reducing a lot of the friction. So at Visual Studio, we work with many teams all across Microsoft, from Azure to GitHub to Windows, and of course, our first-party studios at Xbox. All of us come together that shares a wide breadth of technology that cover many different aspects of game development. And by coming together, we can help you build great games. So in Visual Studio particularly, we're very interested in enhancing your inner loop. From design time productivity features such as editing uprojects, adding class modules, to the first-class debugging experience. And of course, the team is hard at work shaving off your build iteration time by making compile times and linking times faster. And of course, I'll go over all of this in a later demo. So let's get started by talking about performance. In the latest releases of Visual Studio, we have increased the time that you press F5 to launch a debugger by 1.25x. We're able to accomplish this by optimizing the ways that your PDBs are read. And especially in the game industry, we understand that, hey, your projects may have bigger PDBs. So this is an area that we're looking into. Similarly, we also have improved the speed of conditional breakpoints. When you use conditional breakpoints in Visual Studio, it'll be 3.8 times faster. And lastly, for those of you who have games that are using the LTCG, or link time code generation builds, we have seen a 2.9x startup in AAA games. So you can see here, we have anonymized some AAA games, but I'll give you a little sneak peek that they are very popular games. Hint, hint. Also, we have benchmarked all of our performance enhancements against Unreal Engine 5, the sample projects, as well as a handful of our first-party studio games. All right. So we know that developer iteration time is very important to you. And now is the best time to upgrade your compiler. But if you still want to squeeze just a few more seconds, a few more minutes for your build to go faster, we have integrated Build Insights right into Visual Studio. Build Insights is a tool that is backed by MSVC's trace capture technology. Right in Visual Studio, you can go click Rebuild or Build with Build Insights, and the next time you build, we will have a ETL file as well as a visual representation that includes views such as include, file, and tree, so we can identify costly includes, as well as functions that take a long time, long function generation times. And of course, template instantiations. We definitely understand those are kind of hard to tackle, but we want to provide you with a tool so you can take a deep dive into how your build behaves. So let's take a look. Here you see a Build Insights trace file that is loaded with a Pioneer game, which is an open source game. And from the views that I've mentioned, we have include files. So you can see all of your includes. You can expand them. This one doesn't have anything. Okay. That one we can go to do include tree, system editor. Okay. Well, that's okay. We can still talk about the way that the data is represented. So from the different columns, we'll give you the file name. And if you hover over it, you can see your full path. You can not only copy this, but right-click and go to File. So you can immediately start your investigations. And part of what we built with Build Insights is a tool called Include Cleanup. So the way that Include Cleanup works is one of the things that is turned off by default is Include Diagnostics. So over here, if I turn Include Diagnostics on, Visual Studio will then display code lens hints with references that your includes are referencing. And if you have recently ran a Build Insights trace, we'll also give you the build times that each include took. Another cool thing is instead of chasing down includes that have 0 references, we dim it for you so that you can take action to clean up your include lists. Let's take a look down. And here for pi.h, someone left a comment saying, OK, this is only used for pi Lua name gen. If we click on the references, we can then see where this is used. And if you double click, you'll be able to navigate down to your code. Let's go back to the trace file. In functions view, as I mentioned before, you can see if your function has a large force inline size. Those could be problematic and contribute to long build times. Similarly, for templates, we have included template instantiation. So once again, providing you with the crucial information for you to look at your build and work with your team to reduce build times. Not only can you sort, filter, but also if it's project-based, you can click on the filter column and select the projects that you're interested in seeing. Lastly, I want to show a quick link to the settings. So two things that we have added recently to Build Insights is ability for you to specify a location where your trace files are located. You can set a folder, and then all your trace files will collect there. So in case you accidentally close one, you can go back and compare with the results. And also, this is where you activate collect template instantiation. Because the way collecting template instantiation is an expensive process, we have opted to have this setting off by default. But if you care about template instantiations, just go over here, click the check mark, and then your template instantiations will be collected. All right, let's go back to the presentation. So now let's talk about Visual Studio, Unreal integration, and GitHub Copilot. Just by a quick raise of hands, how many of you have used some sort of AI assistance while coding? Great. That's a lot of hands. And keep your hands up if you use Copilot. Awesome. So Copilot is really there to help you to accelerate the pace of game development. We have integrated Copilot directly into Visual Studio so that you don't have to tab back and forth and really reduce that context switching. Copilot understands your code, and it will provide code suggestions, tests, and other things in a natural language. Recently, we have added breakpoint expressions. So when you're using your conditional breakpoints, Copilot can give you some suggestions. One of the newest additions is the ability to exclude designated content. We have received a lot of feedback from studios wishing to exclude third-party libraries and other code when they're using Copilot. And of course, Copilot works with any source control. So for all of you Perforce users, Copilot works. Now, I like to think Copilot as your AI pair programmer, someone who is sitting right next to you, ready to answer your questions and help you. As we know, in game development, there are a lot of unique challenges. And a lot of it is spent a lot of the time is spent on research. You probably remember a time where you had a million tabs open just to look for a solution. But with Copilot, you can talk to Copilot inside the Visual Studio without leaving to your web browser. For more information, I highly recommend you to visit the link aka.ms/github-copilot-features, which will give you a more detailed introduction to GitHub Copilot, as well as some frequently asked questions. So let's talk about uproject supports. We definitely heard a lot from all of you. And the team has been working very hard to support uproject natively in Visual Studio. And in our next release, VS 17.12, we're making it generally available. With this, you won't have to generate a Visual Studio solution anymore. And there's definitely a lot of bonus that comes from that too. Because now we have a much better and finer understanding of uprojects. You will have higher quality IntelliSense, as well as more accurate suggestions. For those of you who are on UE 5.253, in order to get this work, there is some minor patching of UBT. And for 5.4, this will work out of the box. But for 5.4 specifically, we still have some additional patches that are not in main. So this will help you unlock additional features such as the finer understanding for IntelliSense. And we're working with Epic to bring everything into main. And of course, there are other Unreal Engine features in Visual Studio. Most recently, we have added the Unreal Engine toolbar, which is just a common place to collect all of the integrations we have been building in the past years. For example, we have a quick attach to process, so you can use that combo box, type UE editor, or any other processes, and directly attach it without going through the attach to process dialog. And we have improved the Unreal Engine wizard that will let you to add Unreal Engine classes, modules, and plugins. We have also gotten a lot of feedback about developers wanting to change their command line arguments. So now, in the latest preview release, you can see another bar here. You can see -JSON debug outputs. So in that combo box, you can copy and paste your command line arguments so that will be applied the next time you run. Now we know that you can. Now we know from feedback that you wanted a better way than going to the project settings. So we have exposed that into the toolbars. Lastly, we have added UE macro specifier suggestions. This is something that a lot of you have talked to me about. So now, whenever you're writing a UE macro, IntelliSense will give all the possible macro specifiers when you're writing your U properties, U functions, etc. All right, so let's take a look into how Visual Studio and our GitHub Copilot integration works with the Lyra projects. So imagine you just got assigned to a new code base. Perhaps you didn't work in UE before, or maybe you do have a lot of UE knowledge, but not so much for this specific game. Your manager has asked you to implement a small change because every time the character is falling down, it gets stuck on a ledge. This is basically your ramp-up project. Let me show you how GitHub Copilot can accelerate the process. So here we have one of the ways of interacting with GitHub Copilot, and that is with chats. We can have a /explain, as well as many of the other pre-selected prompts that you can use to get a good sense of your code base. So for example, one of the first things that I want to do upon opening a code base is to explain the files that I'm looking at. With /explain, as well as the hash that lets me designate a specific file, I can then ask Copilot to explain Lyra character.h. So with this, explain, and with the file reference, let's see what Copilot comes up with. So give Copilot a few seconds to think, and it will read your active document, which is Lyra character.h. And to give it additional context, you can open up additional files, because GitHub Copilot is only interacting with your open files. One of the newer additions that we're looking to launch soon, specifically for C++, is the ability to reference the corresponding header or CPP file if you only have one open. So as you can see here, Copilot gives you an explanation in natural language. It tells you about your declarations, your structs. And then it gives you links to your browser if you want to search more. And in the latest updates, we have also included the links directly to your code. And as you can see, there's also follow-up questions. While these are just AI generated, sometimes it could really get your creative flow going by asking the correct questions as you investigate. All right, so now that we are a little bit more familiar with the Lyra character file, we can go down and see blueprint references. Although we added blueprint references a while ago, it has been depending on the Unreal Engine plugin Visual Studio integration tool. But as of Visual Studio 17.10, you will no longer need that tool to see blueprint references. There's no more configuration, and you'll be able to see these references from within Visual Studio as long as you have our integration tools installed. All right. So another way of interacting with Copilot, besides the Copilot chat, is you can highlight a block of code and ask Copilot to reference that specific block. So you can ask Copilot any questions in line. Here, we'll ask Copilot to help us with some documentation, because everyone loves comments, right? So with Copilot, you no longer have to really spend that much time writing comments anymore. And specifically, because of our integration with Doxygen comments, I'm asking Copilot to write the comments in Doxygen style. So later, as you hover over it, you can see the Doxygen style comments. Copilot will give you a diff, which you can accept or cancel. So as you can see here, we can get the Lyra player state associated with this character, with the get Lyra player controller. Okay. And when you hover over the symbol, your comments are formatted according to Doxygen style. Now, let's see other ways of interacting with Copilot. I'm typing a prompt that asks whether this class, base class, has a function that is called when the character lands. Notice my prompt. I didn't ask Copilot if a particular name function exists, but rather I asked for its intent and functionality. Copilot is able to see through the base class, and then it'll tell you there is a lambda function. So great, this is a great start for our investigation on how we can nudge the character forward a little bit. It'll give you a signature that you can override in the .h, as well as an example of this, a template for your CPP file. So with a quick trick, Control K and O, I'm able to switch between my header and CPP file. Now, let me show you the third way of interacting with Copilot. But before I do that, do notice the colorful braces. The colorful braces are just visual indicators that really help you maintain that context, especially if your code has many and very deeply nested functions. So that on a simple scan, you can see where your braces start and ends. In addition, if you look at the top, we have added sticky scroll. As you're scrolling up and down, you'll be able to keep that context by seeing the first line of whenever a brace opens. All right. So here we want to add the implementation of the lambda function. As I was mentioning before, the third way of interacting with Copilot is exactly is by writing comments. So I'm saying, write me an implementation of landed that moves the character forward a little bit to help with landing. Copilot will give you some code suggestions. You can use tab to accept. So here we have a function that moves the character forwards by 10. But I don't like hard coding And of course, my designers will want this to be exposed to a blueprint. So I'm going to rename that 10 into a variable called shift amount. And then, because maybe I'm new to Copilot, I can actually ask Copilot Unreal Engine related questions. So for example, how do I expose this new variable that I've added as a blueprint? after giving Copilot a little bit to think, it's telling me that we can use a uProperty function to add this. Great. We can either copy this or just write a comment, and both ways will help you get the code that you need. So I used the hotkey Control-K and O again. And then we're back at the header file. So after I paste it in, you can see we have a uProperty of blueprint read and write along with the category. And one of the last things that we have added recently is the ability to have Visual Studio understand the Unreal Engine naming convention. If you click on this suggestion bubble, we'll give you a suggestion to apply the naming convention to this variable. And then it will run the rename command to go through all of your variables. So as you can see here, we're looking at blueprint references. And if you didn't know, you can actually double-click to open the asset inspector to see all the assets that is related with the blueprints. OK, so now that we have implemented this landed function, let's do another task, which kind of has to do with fall damage. So by going to the Lyra health component file, why don't we just add 2 more uProperties that will handle the way that the character interacts when it falls. So the first one, I'll just say a property that sets the last time the character has fallen from, so the last safe height. And it's OK if you misspell it, because Copilot will understand your intent. Here, it gives you a uProperty. And then as well as the float for last safe height. And let's add another property. What if we add a flag that keeps track of when's the last time the character has received fall damage? So as you can see here, you can type, and Copilot will guess what your intent is. So once again, it'll give us a uProperty. As a bool. Now, one of the things that we have added recently is the memory layout view. We know how important memory management is for game developers. And by giving you a visual representation of the memory layout, you can then optimize your memory layout to save those important bits. Okay. So after I finish editing this with the new macro specifiers, I can then go up back to the Lyra health component class and see the memory layouts. But of course, I can always ask Copilot how to do this in my project. So we can ask, how can I optimize the memory layout of the class? After you give Copilot a few seconds to think, it'll give you several suggestions as well as tactics of how to approach this problem. Okay. So the next thing we can do is go back up. And then once you hover over the class, you'll see the size and the alignment of the class. Take notice that right now is size 328 bytes. You can then click the memory layout view and open up how exactly your variables are laid out in memory. Now, if we scroll down, we can see that we have added we have a struct, and then a float, and then a bool. That is not the most optimal way of arranging the memory. So what we can do is just put the bool next to the struct, which are both 1 bit each. After you make the change, you can go back to the memory layout view. So here, we have reduced it by 8 bytes. We can confirm by going to the visual and see. Let me go back here. As you can see, because we changed the way that the variables are laid out, we have the struct next to the bool, which saves us an entire row according to the alignment. All right, so for Visual Studio, you have seen some of our performance improvements, how to use build insights, as well as organizing your class definitions with memory layouts. With GitHub Copilot, you have seen the deep integration with Visual Studio. And these work together to help you accelerate the pace of game development. So I'd like to give a special thanks to our partners at Epic Games that helps us, especially with uproject. Without their help, it would have taken a lot longer. And of course, our first-party partners at Rare, the Coalition, and Double Fine, who not only give us feedback, but also technical expertise. And of course, I like to thank the community because this is not possible without your feedback. Whether it's through conversations on social media, interviews, whether it's hallway conversations at conferences, your feedback is important and helps to drive the direction of the Visual Studio team. So today, I hope you have walked away with some tips and tricks of how to be even more productive in game development. Thank you, and we'll open up for questions.